Okay.
Welcome, everyone. Give us a prayer in the Father, Son, and Spirit. Lord, we thank you for this day, we thank you for our parish, this season, a special way we thank you for the gift of married life, and we ask you to watch over all of us, especially watch out for those who have suffered from divorce, need healing, and have questions to be answered, and may we have the strength and grace to accompany them and answer questions and work to strengthen our parish, especially marriage and families. We ask all these things in Christ's name. Father, Son, and Spirit. Again, welcome. I'm obviously a parish priest here at St. Anne's, but I'm also a canon lawyer, and I work at the Marriage Tribunal, but on a more regular basis here at the parish, I prepare couples for marriage. And whenever a couple tells me that they want to get married, of course I happen for them. And as we have our initial meeting and I get to know the couple, I want to hear their story, what their story as a couple. Every couple has a story and about their respective families. But most importantly, and firstly, I need to know if they are actually free to marry in the Catholic Church. But liberty to marry in the church has to be found at first. Freedom to marry consists of two things: the capacity, the ability to marry, and then the availability, or the qualification to marry. Now, by capacity and ability, I mean like being well enough emotionally, physically, psychologically to marry. Because consent is what makes marriage. People talk about, oh, father so-and-so married us. No, we didn't. The man and woman marry each other. It's the one sacrament where the people, the man and the woman, are the actual ministers. And then availability is being qualified, not being impeded, not being stopped from marrying. For example, I would be well enough to marry physically, emotionally, psychologically, but I'm not available to marry because I'm ordained. Me being ordained disqualifies me from marrying. It's an impediment to be married in the church. And there are other impediments that we'll talk about. Now, the church, by law, requires a time of preparation for the sacrament of matrimony. Every parish has a different program, but it's got to happen in some way, shape, or form. And the goal of marriage prep is to discern if this proposed marriage is in fact the will of God. Now, this can be one of the touchier parts of marriage prep because couples come in, and sometimes the first thing they start with is the date and the venue, and this is when we're going to get married. We want you to make it happen. So I have to kind of slow it down and say, well, let's just make sure that this is what God wants. I know you're allowed, but I believe you. Why wouldn't I believe you? But let's just make sure this is what is in fact what God. So for marriage to be valid in the Catholic Church, the couple, they've got to complete the marriage prep. They've got to send all the paperwork into the diocese. The couple must receive any special permissions or dispensations, warnings later that they're required. And the couple must be married before a minister of the church, a priest or deacon, and at least 2 witnesses. As I said, consent makes marriage the free, voluntary, and unconditional exchange of public promises. If any of these elements are missing, it's on me to make sure that I'm through all the steps and the diocese knows about it and the bishop knows about it. Does that make sense? And if a couple doesn't do this, sometimes marriages are invalid due to lack of form. If somebody, a Catholic, just goes to the beach to get married and skips all this, it's not a valid marriage. So, yes, it takes time. It's certainly not as easy as going to the courthouse or some other Christian church, but this is what our Catholic requires, and Catholics are bound by. As I go along, you can interrupt me with questions, but we're going to take a break eventually for some snacks and waters, and then more formal Q&A, and then time for one-on-one talks. Yes? Yes, we'll have time for questions later. And this is not preaching. It's going to be a little more technical than what I usually talk about in Mass. It's important. There are impediments that automatically prevent certain people from marrying in church. I already mentioned one, somebody being ordained, me, and the priest, or even after the deacon's ordained. his wife happens to pass away, if he's a married deacon, he's not free to marry. A previous marriage of any kind, civil or sacramental, is an impediment to marrying in the Catholic Church. So when I meet with a couple and having never been married before, in any way, in any shape or form, church, not the church, courthouse, any, the answer needs to be no, otherwise we have to stop. People who have taken solemn vows, the religious order, monks or nuns, religious brothers or religious sisters, they are impeded from marrying. Being too young. Boys below the age of 16 and girls below the age of 14 by law are impeded from marrying. Now, does that sound really young to you? Yes, it does. You're allowed to say yes. But we have to remember the law is for the whole world. We're talking about some Catholic village in sub-Saharan Africa, it might be normal and custom. The diocese, though, the bishop has the authority to raise that limit. So here in Raleigh, if you're below 18, you need special permission from the bishop. But the law is what it is for the whole world, and yet each diocese can make it different. Physical problems like impotence by either the man or the woman is an impediment. And this has to be perpetual and antecedent impotence, not something periodic or a result of a medical problem, something just a while like something beforehand, especially if it was hidden from the other person. Crime, man, and this is pretty rare, a man who kidnaps a woman in order to marry her, someone who kills another person's spouse in order to marry that person. Crime committed in order to marry someone makes that person impeded from marriage. For a couple to be free to marry in the church, they sometimes need special permission or dispensations. First, the dispensations. You need one to marry an unbaptized person. It's perfectly possible, it shouldn't be hard, but yeah, you have to make that clear. The bishop needs to provide the dispensation for, like a Catholic, to marry a Jewish person, or a Hindu, or Muslim. To marry a person whose baptism is doubtful, like Protestant Christian who's baptized, but the church burned down, and they don't keep records the way we do for the most part. They can't prove it. And all the witnesses who were there on that day are dead or can't find stuff like that. You need dispensation. You would also need a dispensation to marry a second, third, or fourth cousin. It's possible, it's rare, but yeah, you need to be dispensed from that. And basic permissions to marry a baptized Protestant. Like the most recent wedding I witnessed, was not celebrated outside of Mass. A Catholic lady and a Baptist gentleman. Part of their marriage file was this document from the bishop and giving them permission. If either person has children from a previous union, any of you think of why they would require permission? Why would the church care? If either party wants to get married in the church has children from a previous union, why do you think the diocese would need to give permission to that person to marry? Well, if the kids are already, that promise is about children to come that you haven't had yet, but that's a different point for a good one. The point of this permission is if there's pressure, like some lady, single mother, she meets a nice guy, but in the back of her head, she's thinking, oh, this is perfect. We get along, I need somebody to help me raise the kids. She feels like she might not have as many options. If there's any kind of pressure or circumstances like that, and you just have to say, okay, there are children from the previous union, everything else checks out. Then it would be my responsibility to make sure, like, okay, without these kids, would you still want to do this tactfully, kind of get a sense of where they are. You need permission if there are obligations to another person from a previous union, like a man falls in love, he's honest with his girlfriend, and then fiancé, he's paying alimony, child support. The same thing, okay, help him discern his motives. Right? If you didn't have this other obligation, but you still want to marry, what about this previous union? I've actually never had it come up yet. I've almost been a priest for 8 years. Some of the stuff it's possible, but it's not common. If you want to get married in a place other than a Catholic parish, chapel, or oratory, like the beach, like a non-denominational chapel, an island, a fancy restaurant, you have to have a good reason. Like the better examples are, I remember one couple where the guy was a West Point grad. He, both Catholic, he and the lady, they wanted to get married at the famous non-denominational chapel at West Point. So the Diocese of Raleigh sent this paperwork up to this diocese in New York, and the bishop up there proved it, and they got married, validly in that chapel, which is not the Catholic Church. Had they just gone there, like without checking with me, without checking with the bishop up there, it would not have been valid. To marry someone who's baptized Catholic but raised in another faith, the sacraments aren't magic. If somebody is Catholic because of their baptism, but they spent their entire conscious life living and acting and thinking of themselves as something else, that needs to be talked about and permission needs to be provided. If you want to marry a baptized Protestant within a Mass, you need permission to do that. Most couples, I don't know, a good number will just want to have their marriage celebrated outside of Mass. Like the most recent couple I mentioned, it was a liturgy of the Word, then they got married, and there was a blessing, and that was it. If a man wants to marry a woman expecting a child, permission is required. Similar reason, like I mentioned a minute ago, if there's a sense of like, okay, we want to do the right thing, she's looking for life, she's have a baby, but man wants to do the right thing in her hair, she wants this man to take care of her and her child. If there's any pressure or sense like if she wasn't expecting, then they would want to get married, then that needs to be talked about. A valid marriage is not possible if there's any kind of pressure to marry from parents or family or circumstances. Remember, it's not possible to marry an unbaptized person within Mass, but only outside Mass. So if you fall in love with somebody who's not baptized, you have to think about that, okay, how much would it hurt not to have Mass? Don't be surprised. You get happy with your marriage prep and everything seems to check out, and you're like, okay, well, let's talk about the wedding Mass. And really, you can get married, but not in a Mass. You know why? When was it within a Mass or within, like I talked about, liturgy of the Word? No. This is the law, whether it's followed all the time. I'm not actually judge a priest. You didn't do anything wrong. But the thing to remember too about the prayers, there's a set of prayers for marriage outside of Mass. Marriage between a Catholic and an unbaptized person that are different than the prayers. It's like a nuptial blessing for two baptized people. The first to wife is representing the church and husband is representing Jesus. That would make as much sense if man is Jewish, right? So it's it helps liturgically. It is what the law requires, but these are just permissions. They're not about validity. Marriage between a Catholic and a Protestant requires the Catholic party to promise that any children they're going to have will be baptized and raised as Catholics. There's a statement, either in person or I've even done it on the phone a few times, where the person's I, the Catholic Party, promise to raise any children we have in the faith and not respect the conscience of the party. And if the answer is, well, we're not sure, or no, or then everything stops. Yeah, it is a deal breaker. It's spiritually confusing and not good for the kids to grow up with what do we believe. And what can happen sometimes with marriages with a Catholic and not a Catholic person. They may be a great couple, but they've got to be aware that there are going to be tensions. Right? One person is going to this church and the other one another one. They don't go at all. And that night bring the kids into the family. What's going to happen to them? Anybody who wants to marry in a diocese wants to have their parents or some other guardian sign an affidavit and get it notarized that their son or daughter has no reservations about it. If there's something going on, maybe some sort of real resistance from the parents, and you find out about that, and you can talk to them and say, what's going on? And maybe the couple's not been telling me everything, whatever that is. And the reason this is a rather recent development for the diocese, we've had people lie to us, hide things, facts about themselves and their backgrounds that would have stopped everything from going forward. So this affidavit was something in the last couple of years that was It's sad when a marriage fails and the couple is legally divorced. Divorce is sad, but it's not itself a sin. Divorce is a legal process, but it's not a sin. So a divorced Catholic who's living as a single person may receive Holy Communion and the other sacraments of the Church, except, of course, marriage. Got this previous marriage, everything, you can receive every other sacrament, except if a divorced person wants to remarry in the Church, he or she must discover if that previous marriage was valid or invalid. And that's where the tribunal comes into play in my background. If the previous marriage was invalid, then that person is free to remarry in the Church. But until an investigation takes place, the assumption is as long as the form of marriage is followed, marriage prep, before a minister, 2 witnesses, all that was there, then we're going to assume the marriage is valid until it's proven that it is. So the marriage tribunal of the Diocese of Raleigh exists to help people discover if they are free to marry in the Church. I'm one of them, I'm a member of the tribunal. It's a combination of priests and lay people, Anglos and Hispanics, great group of people. It's a type of ministry, and I spent 4 years studying through Catholic University to get my degree. So it's important to me, and it's a special part of my work. So if you need this kind of help, or know somebody who does, please tell me. People sometimes are afraid to come forward and ask for help. At least we can have a conversation, we can tell them what's going on. Go from there. And I thought I had more than 2, but I had a couple pamphlets that describe some of what I'm going to go over tonight. I'll get more. I also have this in the PDF file form. However, partly because we're North Carolina, before a tribunal can begin to work with someone officially, that person needs to be already legally divorced. You might wonder why. Well, the reason why is North Carolina is one of the states, they're one of the 5 that have this law called alienation of affections. If you're not legally divorced, the tribunal got involved. The other person, the ex-spouse, soon to be ex-spouse, can say, well, you caused my divorce. The diocese can get sued. We have to wait until somebody says, okay, I need help.
here's my divorce decree, and now we can get started. It's meant to defend marriage, but I don't like it because we can start to help people find out, but yet we have to wait. But yet we also want people to reconcile, so it's kind of okay. Someone whom the tribunal helps is called the petitioner. And you're asking for help. The ex-spouse is the respondent. Those terms are important. So you're asking the tribunal, you are petitioning us to look at your previous marriage to see if it was valid or not. And part of this is a lot of work. The tribunal is going to ask you to answer questions and write what's called a narrative, answering detailed questions, open-ended questions about your background, how you met, upbringing, dating, courtship, marriage, and then the events that led to failure of the marriage and divorce. This can take a while. Have any of you ever heard that this process takes a long time? One reason it can take a while is because this narrative part is hard. And it's painful, people put it off. The church can declare a marriage null or invalid for any number of reasons. Here are some of them. Somebody can have a physical, emotional, or psychological incapacity that prevented him or her from marrying validly. So for some reason, during marriage prep, a person, or both of them maybe, people who appeared capable of marrying were not in fact capable. Maybe a developmental disorder, serious brain alcohol dependence, not just occasional overindulgence or drinking problem like in the beginning stages, but severe alcoholism. Drunkenness on the wedding day. You know, with young couples or whoever, it might seem cute or funny. Get started with a reception before the wedding. Start drinking. It's not a good idea. So you need to know what you're promising, because consent is what makes marriage. It's pretty rare, but yeah, somebody's completely drunk on their wedding day and they're exchanging their promises. The marriage is not valid. Personality disorder, anxiety disorder, schizophrenia, severe clinical depression, severe external pressure from either a boyfriend or parents, for example. Now back to the examples you're expecting, or certain cultural groups, like if there's a lot of pressure from cultural group in an ethnic parish, you've been dating for a long time, now you're expecting you have to get married. That kind of external pressure, if you prove it, would make the marriage invalid. Severe, deeply rooted homosexuality, compulsive, and this is compulsive same-sex attraction, not a past phase or isolated activity. And this problem is going to involve fraud. Like a man or woman doesn't get around to telling his or her fiancé that they're struggling with this, then they get married, and there are issues, problems. If this comes out, it could be one of the grounds and the reasons why the tribunal might say, okay, this marriage is not valid. Speaking of fraud, fraud is one of the grounds for annulments. And the word annulment is interesting. It comes from the Latin nullus. Nullus means not any or none. The church is not like breaking a contract or saying something is not bad. It's saying the marriage that appeared to be valid was in fact not valid. It's not the same as a legal divorce. When the government doesn't care, they see marriage as a contract to be ended. But we don't. The sacrament is a bond that not even God can break. Valid marriages. Covenant. So it's proven, it's shown that it wasn't. So fraud. If a man hides from his fiancée his own mental health problems, and/or he hides his own family's history of mental illness. That could be one reason why a marriage was declared invalid. A woman might hide the fact that she's infertile. And this is important because in the moments before the couple marries, there are a series of questions. John and Mary, have you come here to enter into marriage without coercion, freely and wholeheartedly? I have. Are you prepared, as you follow the path of marriage, to love and honor each other for as long as you both shall live? I am. Are you prepared to accept children lovingly from God and to bring them up according to the law of Christ and His church? I am. There's some ladies promising this. At the same time, she never got around to telling the guy that she's infertile. She's scared, or she thinks, well, maybe I'm not really infertile, or whatever the reason is. Any big facts that are hidden from the other person, not small faults, normal human like vices, but they're big stuff. A man hides his history of serious crime. Never gets around the telling scan and say that he served time in prison. Now, if they do talk about it and it's known, then it's known. It's not fraud. It's not the crime that prevents the guy from marrying, but the fact that it's hidden from the other person. We never give up on people. It's just things need to be, light needs to be shown on their face. Well, if there's no fraud, then it's just the cross that they have to bear, and this is a different issue. We have witness couples, we have national family planning, people in the diocese who can say, okay, let's look at your cycle. It's one of the beautiful reasons why church is teaching on national family planning makes sense. The lady's been on birth control for 15 years. She had no idea that she's going to have a hard time conceiving. All those years might go by and something might have been able to be spotted and others to fix. Yeah, that's a heavy cross, but it's not a fraud, and it doesn't invalidate marriage. Marriages can be declared null for any kind of simulation, like pretending. Total simulation, for example. A person marries only to achieve some other goal, like citizenship or for money. It's kind of an extreme example, but a true story. There was, I think he was Grant. He was studying at Catholic University in Washington, D.C. His student visa was about to run out. He was just joking at it. Yeah, I really like it because America's pretty neat. I don't want to go back. And this friend of his, this gal, said, well, why don't we just get civilly married? Then you can be a citizen. Okay. They went down to the courthouse and got married. And then left and never saw each other. She's Catholic. A number of years later, the light goes on. She realizes it's just like, wow. And it was a simple procedure. She hadn't gotten married to anybody else. And she just said, look, I totally simulated this. We had no intention to do anything other than just kind of fake it so that pretty, it's not common, but true story. An intention against children, somebody could simulate marriage and answer that question about being open to kids, but not really mean it. So a person marries while at the same time completely excluding any openness at any time to children. This is more than just the grave sin of temporary or periodic use of birth control, or having vasectomy and having reversed. If something is not meant to be like forever, it's wrong, it's a sin, but it doesn't invalidate the marriage. But if somebody has this complete, absolute intention to never have kids, lies about it, simulates marriage by excluding this part of the promise, then that's not a bad marriage. You would need to be able to prove it.
lady's dear friend or both of her sisters or her mother says yes, and we talked about it at length. We actually have a letter. She talked to not everyone kids. Testimony would be gathered. People can simulate and have an intention against fidelity. For example, a person marries while at the same time considering future infidelity a possibility. Like holding it open in their minds is something that they would want to do. This infidelity could be with someone that they know or anyone they might happen to meet. The point is that the spouse, at the moment he or she is exchanging promises of marriage, is excluding fidelity. Now, what makes this painful? This is a difficult one to talk about. This does not include a couple validly married, together for 25 years, everything appears fine. One of them gets involved with somebody in the future. Off sin. The human relationship might never be the same. Marriage might have to fail. But it's pretty hard to argue that going back 25 years to the moment of marriage, that this person intended to be a figure. But so the timing of when things happen is really important. I can remember when I was studying, the professor gave an example. There was a guy who entered the church through RCA, got married to his fiancée, an airline pilot. 6 months into the marriage, he's gone a lot. His wife's getting kind of sick of his work schedule, but that doesn't seem to be in the world. And she discovers evidence that he's involved, he's cheating on her inside of town. And he says, well, this is just what we do. This is leaving guys and pilots. And he's like, wait a minute, what about RCA? What about everything that went through the marriage prep? Just last year. There's no way, with the timing, that he could have intended to be faithful. Compared to 25 years, some man might just go through some psychotic midlife crisis, which makes him more specific to life. Two different situations. So it's part of what makes this process hard is I'll always take the time to read it. People, when they fill out their narratives and they answer the questions, they tell us everything about everything. It can be hard. I do my best to help people understand that things that are the closest in time to the marriage moment are the most relevant. People can simulate marriage having an intention against what's called perpetuity. A person can marry while at the same time considering divorce a valid option. He or she believes that the bond of marriage is like a contract that can be broken. But this is having an intention against the sacrament itself. Like saying, yes, this is a covenant, represents the relationship that Jesus has with the church, but I don't really want it. So it's sort of like talking about sacramental reality, but then intending your heart more of a contractual way of thinking. This can happen in mixed marriages between a Catholic and a non-Catholic. And this is hard work for me to get people to buy into this. Even the Protestant party, the Catholics marrying Protestant in the Catholic Church, the Protestant party must sincerely believe that the marriage is a sacrament. They have to. And it's my job to go over that. Because the church believes that any marriage between two baptized Christians is itself a sacrament, even if those Christians are not Catholic. It doesn't matter if the church doesn't consider marriage a sacrament. We do. In fact, they're baptized. Like marriage is weird in the Catholic Church. It's the one sacrament that predates the actual church.
People can simulate marriage having an intention against the good of the spouses. And this is about like abuse. So like right before or soon after marriage, if there's any kind of physical or emotional abuse or severe neglect by one of the spouses, refusing to work, actual domestic violence, we're talking about more than just faults. People have to deal with each other, but if there's something that starts it right away, or maybe even what's going on when they're engaged in dating, then it's unlikely that that person doing the abuse ever intended to even try. Now, this is rather new in the law. It used to be before 1983, as long as you're open to kids, as long as you're married to the church, it's valid. The law didn't really have any room for people that put up with neglect and abuse, verbal abuse. But what if a man never lays a hand on his wife and he belittles her every day for 30 years? And it started with right away. There has to be something for those kinds of people. So then marriage fails, and you can kind of prove that with testimony, then the marriage could in fact be declared null. Do people place conditions on a marriage? The person marries believing that I'll be your spouse as long as you're rich or healthy. Or I'll be your spouse as long as you are always faithful. These can be like superficial conditions, like Hollywood stars have prenups. We can't do that. The promises are unconditional. But then the conditions can be subtle. Like another true story from one of my professors when I was studying this stuff. There's a guy that married. He kind of a rocky engagement, but they went ahead and got married. He told everybody in town, she gets on my nerves, I'm not sure I trust her. If she ever cheats on me, I'm out. Everybody heard him say this. He gets married. 3-4 years later, however long it was, he comes home early from his third shift job and like, finds his wife doing what he feared she would do. All right, told you. You did what I feared you would do, so I'm leaving. What made the marriage null was not what she did. You could have argued that. It was easier, more direct to say, look, I told everybody in town, he's placing a condition on his promise. But sometimes there's more than one reason why. You could have argued that she had an intention against the faith, because it wasn't that long after they were married. Or you could argue that he placed a condition on her. Part of my job, there might be 4 reasons why this marriage is invalid, or none, but what makes the most sense? What is actually true? We don't meet these people. All this is okay. People are not in trouble. Marriage is okay. Yeah, it's intense. I mean, it's not just like, okay, somebody has suffered a lot, therefore we need to do something. It's like it depends on what happened. Sometimes the most unsympathetic people, because of the circumstances, it's easy to see why marriages get like null. Like the couple married for years and one person takes off. Probably more hurt there, but it's harder to figure out why the marriage went knocking down. Force or fear. Sometimes people marry because they're afraid not to marry. Persons or circumstances outside the person are so intense that the person is no longer free to say no to marriage. What makes a proposal special when the woman says yes is because she could have said no. She's free either way. So it could be pressure from parents, threats from a boyfriend, cultural pressure, an abusive home. Some young lady's thinking to herself, yeah, this guy I'm engaged with is kind of creepy. I don't like his saying anything. Please look get away from her parents. she gets married and then divorced and admits this to the tribunal to prove that her whole life was this way, then there was no valid marriage. This is more than just having cold feet. This force and fear has got to be extrinsic from the outside in, not just being nervous or uncertain. That might be important, but not what we're talking about. Somebody marries in order to escape some other feared fate, like jumping out of a burning house or something. You got to get away from something. A more subtle example: if someone wants to become a godparent, but they're not confirmed in the church yet. Maybe they're living, with somebody. They're not married, but they're living with somebody. So the priest pressures the person to marry in a church so that she can be confirmed and then qualified to be a godparent. So there's some other goal that someone's trying to accomplish by marrying. It's not that common, but it can happen. I better get married so I can get what I want. I better get married so that my family gets off my back, so I can be a godparent. That it has to be right now. I can't because of how I'm living. It's not as intense as more emotional kinds of force and fear. It can happen. Have you ever heard of people talking about having their marriages blessed? You hear that expression? It's common. It's a little bit confusing. It's not accurate. If a Catholic marries outside the church, at the beach, at the courthouse, at some other Christian church, the couple needs, and then they want to be married in the church, they don't need a blessing. They need to be prepared for and then receive the sacrament of holy matrimony. They're not an engaged couple, obviously. They may have been together for years, but they need more than just a blessing. So that's not what happens. The technical term is a convalidation. The marriage they're in now, the union they're in now, needs to be validated. It's not a blessing. Things are required for that to happen. They need to acknowledge that the first attempted marriage was invalid. They have to acknowledge that, they have to admit it, they have to understand that it wasn't the first marriage, it wasn't, and what they're preparing for now in the Catholic Church is going to be their first sacramental marriage. So if I do my job well and explain this well, if I don't do this well, the priest, deacon, or the parish does not explain this well, the couple may believe that they're simply getting a real marriage blessed. That's not what's happening. One or both of the people may in their hearts believe that all they need is a blessing of an already valid marriage. But these people who think this way, they were married, two Catholics married 20 years ago in the church in Belleville. Now they come to St. Anne and they want to get married here. But they're thinking, and I don't catch it or I don't do a good job teaching them, they really think that it's just a blessing. And then they get married here, and then they get divorced. The thing that needs to be looked at is not the marriage 20 years ago in this church, the marriage here. The one 20 years ago was obviously it doesn't need to be investigated. What they did here appeared to be a sacramental marriage. But if they didn't think it was a sacrament, if they didn't believe it was a sacrament, they thought it was just a blessing, then the marriage here fails. And then they're forced. One of the ways you could argue that it was not valid was, I'm preparing them for a sacrament, they're preparing for a blessing, like we're talking about here. Does that make sense? Yes?
You're saying that if you get married outside the church,
Yes.
you don't need to get along because it's unvalid.
It needs to be looked at by the church. I'll give you an example. If a Catholic marries somebody outside the church, it's already invalid. So you would need to submit to the diocese, give to me proof that you married outside the church.
to have that marriage declared invalid. It's only Catholic sacramental marriages that appear to be valid, there's every reason to think that they're valid, that have to be investigated for. It's called a lack of form. Yeah, it's not as involved. Yeah, if somebody married outside the church, like at a courthouse, there's no investigation required if it wasn't valid. Only Catholics are required to follow these laws. And if the person coming to me is Catholic, and they married outside the church, before they get married again, that first one needs to be declared invalid. So you would just say, okay, here's my marriage certificate from the courthouse. This is the date it took place. This is my decree of divorce for this civil marriage. Diocese of Raleigh will say, you're right, this is not valid. Send me a document that I've included in the marriage file so that they can now marry and accept it. But if that first marriage was in the church, then it's called a formal process. If the tribunal rules that a previous intended marriage was invalid, then the petitioner is going to receive a decree of nullity and is now free to remarry. And this decree of nullity needs to be kept. A copy of it will go in the marriage file, and then a copy of the person. So if I'm interviewing somebody, meeting a couple, and they said, yes, I wasn't married before, and I got a decree of nullity, I'm going to need to see that document. If people have these things, they should keep them, put them in a safe or something. The tribunal, even if we say a marriage was invalid, it might include a condition saying you're free to marry the church, again, if you get consent. There might be it's not just a blanket, sometimes permission. Because we want to help people keep this happened once, it could happen again. You could get in a similar kind of relationship and not see the same kind of things you didn't see before. Before somebody receives a decree of nullity, the person should not date or get engaged because they're still impeded from marriage. They're still bound to their spouse. The relationship can fail. You can not be with your ex-spouse anymore, but the bond of the sacrament is still there. Until you prove that that sacrament is not in fact valid, you're not free to involve. It's just not a good idea. It's better to get this done sooner rather than later so that this is over with before you meet someone. Some people come to the tribunal not even sure if they want to get married. They just want to know what happened. Part of the spiritual journey, okay. I was manipulated, or I was sad, I was lonely, I was praying, whatever was going on. Greater self-knowledge, with God's grace, they can grow in holiness, whether or not they want to get married. I've had people like that. They're not interested in marrying it. They just want to know, what happened. Okay. And obviously, somebody, if you have not yet received the decree of nullity, you're not free to marry in the church again. You're also not free to marry civilly. It wouldn't make any sense. Because then you're not free. If you marry civilly again, then that civil marriage is a problem, right? Because you're still bound to that first spouse. A license to marry versus a civil marriage. In many other countries, couples are required by law to marry civilly first, and only then can they marry in the church. Thankfully, not in America. You have to get a license, but not marry civilly. A couple of weeks ago, I gave the same talk in Spanish for our Spanish community. Mexico, all the Spanish-speaking countries in Latin America.
Most European countries, except England, by law, you're required to get married civilly first. And then you can go to the church. It's confusing for them. Maybe confusing to some other people too. But then you need a license, but you don't. There's no reason to go to the courthouse and get married and then here. But this is going on among some of these minors. This is what they remember in the old country. It's part of these governments interfering with the church to require civil marriages to have a lot of control, charge money, extortion, corruption, and okay, now we're scared. What if the parish charges us money, which we don't? And then those people immigrate. They're married civilly in Guatemala. So yeah, that's some of what I do here. Helping them understand that civil marriage in your home country is not a sacrament, just like it wouldn't be here, so you need to be married in the church. All right. Again, the sacrament of marriage is bigger than the church. The church considers any marriage between a baptized man and woman a sacrament, even if neither person is Catholic. So, if a Catholic wants to marry a Protestant, and the Protestant has acquired marriage to another Protestant, that person needs to contact the tribunal. But this can be tricky. A Catholic person, I don't have to do this marriage. What's this tribunal business? And like, I can't tell you, he's Lutheran. Why does it matter? Well, it doesn't matter because any marriage between two Baptist Christians is considered a sacrament. Even though this Lutheran gentleman and his Lutheran ex-wife belong to a Lutheran church that doesn't use the same theology as we do about marriage. It doesn't talk about it. We do. So it's hard work. Hold on. I'm not saying no. You just need to. You can't say, with respect to your conscience, you need to go through this for the sake of this woman. It's not always received well today. It's not no, it's just get this taken care of. Yeah, we don't pretend sacraments don't exist. It's like, we don't rebaptize people. We don't look at somebody and say, okay, just because you're Lutheran, you're married to another Christian, you pretend that that didn't happen. It did happen. It is a sacrament because we recognize as long as people are baptized with water in the Father, and the Son, and the Spirit, just because they're Lutheran, they're still Christians. Right? But it's a headache for us. If a Catholic Christian is divorced from another Catholic and they go to the church, they're not going to ask them. They don't consider marriage a sacrament. They don't look at marriage the same way we do. It's more contractual. Tribunal process changed on December 8th. Used to be back inception in 2015. Pope Francis changed a number of important things. Tribunals are no longer allowed to charge any money at all. And before it was never that big of a deal that you would have tribunals need to pay their employees and there might be goodwill offering or $200 or whatever it was. But it would vary around the world. People would get freaked out and intimidated, especially before. The Pope, I think it's a good idea. Just said no. Find some other way to hear it. There's no charge for people. The petitioners don't have to pay anything. There's no automatic appeal to a second diocese. We are part of the Atlanta province, and before 2015, every single decision, even the most obvious cases, two 16-year-olds were married for 2 months, lack of maturity, that's one of the reasons marriages can be declared null. Easy. Even that case would have to be sent to Atlanta to be looked at all over.
It was like twice as long. Every case had to be looked at twice, by Raleigh and by Atlanta. Now, Atlanta only gets involved if somebody appeals. If the petitioner gets the decision he or she wants from Raleigh, then it's a vote, like short. People can petition where they live and not have to go through the diocese where they're married. Probably my favorite change is the Pope made, especially for immigrants. You're living here, you're married 29 years. Under the old law, you have to get on the fax machine and try and deal with the diocese a little bit. Not anymore. You do it where you're going. There's more weight given to the petitioner's testimony. You're still required to give names and addresses and contact information for witnesses, but it's kind of subtle. It's not that you don't need witnesses, but under the old law, there's more pressure on petitioners to find people and evidence than there is now. It's still won't stand. This got a lot of press a number of years ago. I don't like to use political terms, but some pretty conservative Catholics were upset, thinking the Pope was like cheapening marriage. He wasn't. He was making this process simpler, making it less complex to encourage people to come forward. And everything I've gone through is pretty involved. I mean, the marriage in the church is considered valid until it's shown not. That's not easy. But instead of having to pay for it, instead of having to have a second diocese look at it, instead of having to go through the diocese where you're married, he just made it simple. Speaking of the world, how many of the dioceses in the world do you think have marriage tribunals? So this is a separate problem. Part of when you listen to the Pope talk about finding solutions for people, he's not thinking only of the United States. If people here don't have a reason, they don't have an excuse not to go to church. But in the Amazon or in these far-flung countries, it may be hard for people to find is going to help. There's more of this talk of discernment, and it's been kind of fuzzy, frankly, but I don't know what else can be done other than what's already been offered to people who are divorced to remarried, but not everybody lives here. Not everybody has access to tribunals. The way the process works, just briefly, a court is convened. There's a presiding judge, somebody who defends the bond of marriage, looks for reasons why marriage still be valid, and then an advocate who lobbies and looks for reasons why the marriage was invalid. The judge is kind of like the tiebreaker. A three-member court. But nobody's on trial, it's just the marriage has been looked at. The judge has to be a priest. Either the defender of the bond or the advocate can be a layperson. I'm allowed to be a judge. I haven't had the opportunity yet, but I am one of the defenders. I spent time reading these cases and writing what are called legal briefs. By law, the ex-spouse needs to be informed of the process. So a certified letter is sent out. If there's a chance that the ex-spouse can cause problems or be violent or abusive, then the tribunal can give permission for the ex-spouse not to do that. But most ex-spouses don't want to permit to do it. They moved on. Some might challenge the grounds of the argument for the annulment. Some might appeal it. Occasionally, people just be spiteful, difficult, just get involved. And they do have the right, if they want to, come in person to the tribunal and sit and read everything, not taking it, not doing it, except read and not leave. They do have rights. It can stress people out because people have visions of having to face off with this person, like American court TV or something, and it's not as well. Any questions before we break for?
That's quite a lot.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I meant it's good information.
Yeah. to circle back maybe before we leave tonight or on senior final. Obviously, not all of this stuff applies to every marriage. You have a couple persons whose marriages failed, and I mean, people came tonight and wanted to come. This sort of stuff, it's important, very personal. People just need to come forward and tell people like me what happened. Yeah, take a break, enjoy the nice refreshments that were provided. When you're not eating, or bring a plate back to the chair, and have it.
I have a slightly off topic.
Great question from Nick. I'll share it with you when you get back to the chair. Yeah. Yeah, this is for definitions. Thank you.
Actually, not one.
Very nicely done.
Were you going to? So are you? Yeah, I
Usually, I'm learning about it. How's time? There are a lot of them.
There's so many of us in the same.
Yeah.
So I want to. But it's just like more life. There's so many things.
All right. We can each have a- Nick, that was a great question. There's never any judgment for me, but there's a reason I'm doing it. You ever seen couples renew their vows? Based on what we talked about, didn't that make sense?
Right now.
Like, join your right hand.
So you're not renewing your vows, but you bless a marriage.
No, we're talking about two different things. Good point. Like, consenting marriage is one of the sacraments that's called marriage sacrament. Change like that. So it's not totally the same time. You can't see all kinds of affection. So I was telling Nick what I was doing. It's kind of, I said, you know, this is awesome enough that I get everything. Long, beautiful, from beneficial if you can do that. I just like to do the work. I never say yes. I don't like empty gestures, and they're already married. They've already exchanged their promises to each other. So there's no point. But I don't get asked that often. If you're ever wondering how.
Father passed on last night at 7 p.m. He talked about this young couple and he wanted to know why they wanted to get married. And the young woman said, well, we love each other, but if it doesn't work out, it's okay. And he said, no. He said, no, I won't bless your marriage. No. But they wanted to have another priest. And that priest said yes. And less than 7 months later, she was already divorced. So she already had gone in with it. And I said, if it doesn't work out, no big deal.
Do you remember the what the ground was?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, she's basically. Thanks for mentioning it. It's like this stuff, and joke was there. Well, it's not. It is what it is. It's more than just miracle. Yeah, it's a real life example of what we're going to allow. You're going to talk to people. Now you're allowed to know people. Beautiful and fun. Promises make marriage. If you promise to conditionally marry each other, words are saying one thing, but your heart is a different way.
So she never went into it thinking it was a sacrament.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And then nothing ever.
One of my professors has been there anyway almost 30 years. He said basically the biggest problem in America has to do with marriages. People culturally have a sacramental sense of marriage, but like when you get right down to it, it's more of a cost benefit analysis. If the benefits are the costs, then if things start to happen versus costing too much, however you define the cost. And cost can be fault, losses, illness, disappointments. And difficulties don't make difficulties in marriage are not the same as working capacities or conditions or things that go back to the very low in marriage. And probably the psychological grounds of the hardest to prove that people will say, I wasn't ready to marry. We were over 20, which is young, but not that. People, petitioners will say, nothing else happened. We were young. I don't think we know what we're doing. Now we're divorced. And the tribunal will bring in a court expert, psychologist, to read through all the evidence. It's tricky. They don't even meet these people. Based on their upbringing, came from a divorce background. Evidence of immaturity growing up. Those are hard.
So I'm here because I'm recently divorced. We've been married 29 years. And we got with me. We were both Catholic, raised Catholic, and he and his parents moved to a different faith. We were actually married. Right from the Catholic Church. And with the requirements that were needed.
You as a Catholic, married.
And his church. So, I'm trying to find out where I'm. No, I'm just recently of divorce, and I was one of those married, and actually in the eyes of God, that, and then the other thing was my question.
Yes. Because remember using expression like your marriage, you would have married in the church. By definition, not about marriage. This is apart from different things that make your marriage go.
I'm learning this today. Made me feel I get all the wrong things. And you know, and we went through marriage counseling, prep classes, and so everything came out in that questionnaire about what we need to learn about each other. We have a son, so he was that person. And that's where I'm at. I just needed to understand.
Yeah.
Because legally we're still here, it's just not valid.
I don't know how. Yeah, you would just need to provide. If you want to see me, you can say, okay, here's the marriage certificate from the church, with the divorce. You copy the baptism certificate. And then diocese brother would just say your marriage is invalid, lack of form. You weren't parents of the Catholic Church, you weren't married from the Eastern Church. It would be trickier, it would be harder if you were married in the Catholic Church, because that assumption would be that valid. We're not making the assumption that we know what. The fact that it wasn't valid, not just no, not, you wanted to want.
But that's something God doesn't perceive me as being married.
Not something like there was a union, not nothing else.
So what does that mean?
You can do your best. If I had been your, if I did increase over the nephew, I would have that way would likely mention comes to me and I would. That's not true. Baptism is what makes us Catholic. Baptists Catholics don't need to come to me.
Yeah.
There's more to do with your identity than like bad things that happen.
The identity was first on the you have to have that. That was my first.
I really think it's very logical. How people relation to God. Human relationships and human relationship. We have human relationship and a union with a child. This union that was not Catholic marriage.
My decision is not even that's my question.
The people marry about how many people know that? Once they know that, just probably spiritual victim managed to be out. Painful as I'm sure most lives and living this way. This is necessary. People You're in the church, you divorce, and you're married again. Go back and forth. Then you're talking in time 5 years from now. It'll be 5 years since you divorced. Now, I deal with this, like, couples come to me, and it's not that common, they're living together, for their marriage. Move on to the marriage. Yeah, you don't need to go to the church. All this stuff, you can have for marriages. Absolutely not. The truth is yours, but you marry. I've seen cases where, like, people have been married for years, and then they get married at the church, and then they get married later, and then after marriage goes. We're only interested, yeah, in terms of like trying to prove knowledge.
Margaret.
Yeah.
What a
crazy year.
Anybody else have questions or find this helpful? Okay.
So, we were married for 11 months before we were allowed to have unvalidated in the church because I couldn't find my business. But I finally said, this is where I made my first, confirmation. So they were actually able to track it down. And the priest knew that I wanted to get back to the staff. And it took 11 months for the Monsignor to finally say, marry him.
Well, good.
And this is 52 years later. So
Yeah, sometimes people can't remember the name of the church where they're baptized. That's tricky. But you know what you have now? It's interesting. You remember the affidavit? Part of it is freedom to marry. Then there's a box. If your baptism is gospel or you can't find this, if you define people who are there, I have my uncle who's still living in there. Call your uncle and a document that's signed. That can take place. You know why the baptism certificate matters? On the back of it, are all your instructions, including marriage. So the reason we do that is somebody said, well, I've never been married before. Will you marry me? The man says, that's old, and I go to the parish. And the priest says, well, I need a new copy of your message. If he in fact has been married, of course, I don't know. At least
So when you're married, does it go back to where your original, where your other sacraments were, or does it stay like, if we were married through the military or married?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of going back, there's a form like the diocese copy. John married Mary, copy goes to the Church of Baptism of both people. You record it in the registers.
Oh, okay. So it went back to his, because he was Lutheran at the time, so it went back to his too?
No, it would just be.
Just being made it happen.
That's for that reason. It kind of serves the purpose of like back in the day when you would post bans. Does anybody know of any reason why people would refuse to marry? Mary's village. So more minor record keeping. Standing establishments. But it's kind of, I know it's hard, but it's like, the fact that these things can take some time, it's like, I expect her to do anything seriously. Yeah, the new certificate, and get this, it's interesting. It's got to be within 6 months of the wedding. These two I get married on October 1st. The new baptism certificate that you provide needs to be on or after April. It can't be from 16 years ago or 2 years ago. Well, you could have got married in your own. You would have a slide flag. I mean, how many people do this?
Why don't we put him
Because it is noted in the Sacramento Register.
I don't think in the case I don't have my baptismal insurance marriage.
Yeah, the two of them.
Well,
It is noted, I'm thinking I have it in the Sacramento Register. There's all their stuff in this column. Yeah, you could know it is not a sacrament, so it's like different category. Yeah, it's kind of records. I mean, it's why sacramental records you have to acquire through save. Yeah, it's tricky with other Christian churches because they don't have records. They have procedures, they have bylaws, but they don't really have canon law. So they're more independently operated. It just doesn't have the approach in charge.
so what if I charge orange down? Would it be on file with the diocese as well?
But
Where, like, when we got married?
it'll be both places. Like, I was just mentioning Harry is responsible for keeping a play of all sacramental records.
Well,
And
and then if the church is, what do you call it? Closed. What if the Catholic Church is closed? Then where do those records go?
well, great question. Is another thing I like. Parishes are recognized. Sometimes it's merged with another parish. Rarely it's actually closed. More often, this faith community would be merged with another. People go over here, all the records for those people as well.
Okay.
So when you marry, it's on the back, on the baptismal table, and when you get your marriage normal, is that record gone?
No, it's going to be noted in the sacrament book for marriage. Any person who has to acknowledge they have it. So somebody's to come to me, well, I want to get married. Well, I want to get married. I had a previous marriage, that's a null. I'm going to need to see that. Once I have that, marriage record.
So you said that is what is sometime later, you do it about you don't know.
Oh, yes, spouse.
Yes.
The diocese has the internet in general, plus different websites they can find. And they send out a certified letter through the people usually have some contact information, maybe not an updated address, but a phone number or email, and how they're not.
Good, I don't want to worry about it. I'll hang around and clean up and then everyone else.
That was very helpful.
Well, good. I do my best. I got my degree in 2018. Been busier lately. I go to the Tribunal every Monday for about 5 hours. And yes, it's like, especially my role as a defender, it's like to make a reasonable effort to look for reasons why the marriage is so well. But it's unreasonable. Sometimes I've actually written this one. I don't see evidence for this particular reason, but maybe evidence for another. Even the answer no is additional. And this will happen where they change the grounds instead of simulations. What criminality does, the grounds for this that we would have to create. That's how it is. It's a search for the truth. It's not going in and saying, I'm going to accuse people what they want. Denialism and marriage. Just hope. I spent a lot of time quoting the petitioner, quoting the witnesses. If somebody's saying, the petitioner's best friend saying, I know they were both children. And another one says, I know they were open. There's doubt. Let's finish with prayer. Father, Son, and Spirit. Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to be together. Please give us the grace and the patience to feel in the church. Help us listen. Walk with others. We ask all these things. Father. Yeah, I'd like to. I'll do. Okay.